Thanks everyone for coming. I like that you've kept the front open for the stragglers who have to sit there. I may have to come out and drag you. I feel like you have to make it more interactive if you're sitting where, I'll be honest, that's where I would be sitting. I would be in the back in that corner so no one could see me. Thanks for coming. You can start the clock at 30 minutes, ready, go. There you go, perfect. Thanks for coming. Jared Blank, you heard my full bio. It's more than my parents know about me, so there'll be a quiz about that at the end. I work for a company called Bluecore. We are a retail marketing platform focused on the email space, but I know that everyone comes to these conferences not to hear the vendor dude blabber on about their company. And so I'm going to put on my analyst and retailer hat today to talk about personalization. And as a marketer, I have completely oversold this by saying there's one word that will transform your marketing program. I mean, I'll tell you later what the word is, and then there's other words. And we've gone a little nuts here with the stock photography, and it looks like that one is somebody giving you the finger. It is not. It is giving you a finger, but I think it represents the one word, as I understand it. So we're going to talk about personalization today. And I think that everyone at every conference, personalization comes up. And I think the way we're talking about personalization is, I think we're missing the mark, or we are wrong. And we're missing the opportunity to really focus and talk about what does personalization actually mean and what can you do about it? Because we've been talking about it so long, and anytime you're at a conference, someone is up in this space telling you why you're doing a bad job at personalization. But I don't think that's because retailers are doing a bad job. I think it's because we haven't really defined it in a way where we can action on it and do something about it. So today we're going to talk about what personalization actually is, or how we think about it, and secondly about the email channel, which I think is the best place to start when you're thinking about personalization. So if that works, let's go. So retailers have really been mocked for being terrible at personalization, and you see a lot of headlines that look like this that make me crazy. From Bloomberg, who usually does a good job, that says personalization helps retailers. Too bad they're terrible at it. And you start to see lots of articles like this that are suggesting like, oh, you know what, that personalization's great. Why are retailers so stupid? And I really hate that type of article, and you see a lot of it, and there's always some guy quoted, and it's like, oh, Steve Johnson from Denver, Colorado, went and bought a pair of sneakers online, and 3 days later he was retargeted with an ad for those sneakers. Oh, they're so stupid for doing that to me. But the way you make personalization work is really hard. It's really challenging. And these articles that suggest like, oh, well, Target had that story where Target supposedly predicted someone's pregnancy. Do you remember that from a couple of years ago? That's a bit of a wives' tale. It didn't exactly work that way. But you see articles like this, well, if Target could predict one person's pregnancy, why can't you tell when I already bought the shoes? And I think that's ridiculous. And it's made retailers defensive about personalization. And then you see things like this, and I love this. So I'm going to walk over here. This is from a consulting firm that is not named, though you're free to Google it after seeing this, that says where they get up and they say, well, there's 4 R's you need to know as a retailer to make personalization great. And once you do just these easy 4 R's, the whole thing will be better. So all you have to do is recognize, that's the first R, and that says you identify both your known and unknown customers and prospects through data from your CRM and your DMP and your device and social and all those sources. So that's first. All you do is identify your known and unknown, though how would you identify them if they're unknown? That's why they're unknown, through all of these different things. And if you think about the meeting this would require and how many people would have to be in that room from all these different teams. So once you do that, it's just simple. You move across the heart over to remember. And then you remember is about knowing your customer's history. It means not just knowing what they buy and view and consume, but why they did that. You know, so if you're like a company that does $1 billion online, everyone who bought, like, why did they buy that thing? You should know that. Then you jump down to relevance, that's next in the heart, and delivering personalization within the context of digital experience, such as who and where they are, recent events, I don't know what that is, and what time of year it is, and or what time of year it is, because it's not ridiculous. You also need to know, you have a choice of whether you should focus on recent events or the time of year. And then finally, you reach them with the right marketing or the offer or the content or the product recommendations for the customer based on their actions or their preferences or their interests. This is silly because you can't do that. And I've been in the room when you're just trying to move things an inch. And the idea that you could possibly do all of this, or that even if you said, oh, this is just your goal, it's so far and so removed from the reality of sitting in the seats you're in and what day-to-day life is in retail, that this I almost find insulting. There's not much you can do about this. And so yes, maybe the CDO at your company has something like this, if they've hired this company in their room as sort of a North Star. But in reality, any one of these things is so incredibly challenging as to be unrealistic. I think there's 3 reasons why this is hard, and we're going to talk a little bit about them today. And so we're going to use some of this photography here. This is fake Alana from Broad City, and she's saying that you haven't been given the resources that you need to achieve personalization. And I like this survey, not to just to complain about consulting firms all the time. I used to work for one, but I like this one from BCG that was asking about the top barriers in your organization, the top barriers to personalizing. And that the primary reason people gave was that they said there's too few people dedicated in my organization to the personalization effort. So the reason we're struggling is because I don't have enough people to make it work. And that I'm sure that's true, right? I'm sure every company would say, with some additional people, we could get a little further along. But I actually think the second thing there is more interesting, the lack of a clear roadmap. And if you go back to the 4 R's slide, developing a roadmap to do any single one of the R's requires a whole bunch of steps. And then those steps require steps. Breaking it down and going to your CIO or CTO or head of digital or whoever owns this piece and asking for resources is going to be hard without that roadmap. And if we can't agree on what personalization is and what the steps are that are required, who's going to give you the millions of dollars and people you would need to achieve that? And so I think without clarity around what we're actually trying to do and how to talk about that, that's going to lead to you having too few resources, and then you're not going to be able to achieve it. So part of today is about, okay, how do we define what personalization is if we're a company that's trying to work on personalization, and where can we actually make a difference? So I think this is also an important one, too, around the technical resources that you've been given don't really solve the problem. And what I mean here is that when we talk about personalization, oftentimes, and I think typically, people are talking about 2 things. They're talking about either site A/B testing tools like Maximizer, Optimizely, Monetate, and when they say personalization, they say, oh, I'll personalize my homepage based on whether someone's a new visitor or returning visitor. Or they're referring to product recommendations, like a Certona widget or something where it's people who bought this, bought that. And I think those things are strategies along the path to personalization, but they're not personalization. They're ways you can make the experience a little bit better along the way. And I think when you just limit it to those things, I think you end up also in that situation we saw before where you can't get more resources because someone will say, wait, aren't you already paying Monetate $100,000 a year? Didn't that get you the personalization? And it didn't. Those are strategies to achieve a broader goal. And so I think by limiting it to those 2 ideas that we tend to focus on with personalization, we've done ourselves a disservice to thinking about, well, what do we really need to do more broadly? And thirdly, fake Kylie Jenner there is saying, what is personalization anyway? And so I want to talk a little bit about how we think about personalization. There we go. I talk a lot about these 4 companies. Well, I put this slide together before Facebook became a bad guy. But imagine 3 weeks ago before Facebook was a bad guy and selling your data. So these 4 companies, I think, have a lot in common. And so let's start, So the 4 companies have a lot in common around how they personalize. And I don't even know that necessarily people think about Netflix, for example, as a personalization company. But I could tell you that I'm sure when they started, they weren't thinking about, we can out-personalize Blockbuster. They've got 5,000 stores, but we're going to roll out a website that also has personalized recommendations. It's not. I think what's interesting about these 4 companies is that they've built tools that match up products and what they know about those products with the customers and what they know about them. So I have a little slide that says customer product. In Facebook's case, you're the product. And Facebook has thousands or tens of thousands of data points that they can collect on each of you and sell to their advertisers. Right? That's what Facebook does for a living. And 3 weeks ago, that sounded like a great thing. Now it sounds like a terrible thing. But that's what Facebook did. And they built a platform to collect data about their products, you. And they put on some smart data science. And that allowed their customers, advertisers, to buy access to you. Netflix had a really interesting insight really early on, which said, hey, you know what? We can't just say that a movie is a comedy, that we're going to have to break it down into 80 or 90 different components, layer on smart data science, and then match that up with individuals and the movies that people liked. They're foundationally about products, about product knowledge. Stitch Fix 2 has a really interesting model that's not just about selling clothes. It's about starting with attributing the suit or whatever, putting 80 different attributes to the suit, creating the feedback loop. So when you get the box of clothes from Stitch Fix, you call your advisor and say, oh, this one was a little this. I like this. I didn't like this. That goes back into the model. And it's a really, really brilliant feedback loop to help do a better job of matching up products and their attributes with people. And I think the world, especially in apparel, and I come from apparel, the apparel world has to figure that piece out or it will go away. That there's no way the Stitch Fix idea isn't the future of apparel. And I love this quote from Netflix. This is from VP of product there, and he describes personalization without saying personalization, but he says there are 3 legs of the stool of how they make great recommendations to Netflix members. And he says there's Netflix members, there's the taggers who understand everything about the content. So those are the people who watch the movies and say, this is a comedy with a strong female lead, or it's a thriller in Scandinavia, or whatever. And our machine learning algorithms, that's the data science, that take all the data and put things together. There's members, that's customers. There's the content, knowing things about it, and data science. And Spotify does this, and Stitch Fix does this, and Facebook does it. And I can't think of a lot of other companies that foundationally, those 4 companies that I think we would all say, hey, do a really nice job with personalization, are foundationally about those 3 legs of that stool. And what's hard is that every other e-commerce company is completely different than that. Foundationally, you're about an e-commerce platform, about demandware, you're about a warehouse to ship the stuff, and you're about mostly acquisition, but marketing. It's really not about products and knowing your products and finding people to match up with them. It's such a different way of looking at the world. So here's how we think about personalization. So I think about it as the unique stream of communications that your customers get or don't get based on what we know about them and the products we have. And I think the don't get part is equally important, because I think there are customers of yours who can handle getting 5 email messages a day. And I think there's customers who would probably be best with 1 email a week. And the decision to email some people and the decision not to email other people, that's also personalization. And I think we've done ourselves sort of collectively in retail a disservice by selling ourselves short by the job we're doing around personalization. And I think the idea that, hey, you know what? We have a set of customers who we shouldn't email today and instead should either go after on Facebook or not email or send a catalog, that's personalization too. That they should receive communication through a different channel, that's also in this whole world of personalization. So I like the idea of broadening how we think about it beyond just, oh, we changed the homepage or we put a recommendation in an email. All of this is all strategically personalization. Let me talk a little bit about email and why I think it's a great tool for activating personalization strategy. So David Carr, who's a late great media columnist for the New York Times, around the corner from here, wrote an article 2014 where he said email is a festering petri dish of marketing come-ons. And why I like this quote is it's from an article about how great email is and how great email marketing is and how well newsletters work. And this was coming from a really positive standpoint. And his point was, email as a channel can be incredibly useful to communicate with people in a way that's highly relevant to them. And he was talking about publisher newsletters. And in 2014, we sort of saw a growth in publisher newsletters. And what a great channel for doing those things. And he was saying, unfortunately, email as a channel has just been stuffed full of sale newsletters. If I step aside, I actually think there's a lot of reasons to send daily sale messages or twice a day. Email is a great channel for awareness. But I think where he's getting at is there's a lot you can do in email. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about how personalization fits into this. I'm going to talk about something that comes from a great article from TechCrunch that you should read later called How Google Analytics Ruined Marketing. It's in TechCrunch from a year or two ago. And I borrowed liberally a little bit of this from there. And it's really talking about how online, and specifically email as the example, it's a channel, not a strategy. Email is a channel to achieve strategies that you have. It is not the strategy itself. And so you could say, oh, I've got an email strategy, and you think of, oh, we need to email people this stuff, or we need to send newsletters. But email is the channel to do that. But email is also a channel for order confirmation, and it could be for store openings. There's lots you can do there. And by thinking of it as a strategy instead of a channel, you end up having internal arguments about who owns that channel and what you're allowed to do in it, because some person is protective of it. And I think it comes from this. Years ago, marketing teams were set up by strategy. So you had an advertising team and a PR team, and maybe you had an events team, and those are strategies. And if you were an advertiser, maybe you'd advertise sometimes on TV, or you'd advertise in a magazine or in a newspaper. And you didn't have a billboard marketing team, and you didn't have a magazine marketing team, you had an advertising team. And they used those channels as places to put their strategy. Digital teams, on the other hand, tend to be set up by channel. So you have an email team, and you have a social team, and you might have a display advertising team. And they're protective of the channel they're in. And what you end up with is your social team saying, oh, no, you can't put these messages on social because we're using social for these other things. Or in email, which I used to hear all the time, oh, you can't send this promotion today because we're sending this store opening email, and you can only send one thing a day. But that's really silly. Right? There's lots of things you can do in email in a day where people won't get upset. And this idea that, oh, the email channel can handle one message a day and that's it, other than that is a poor experience, sort of breaks down when you think about it. So if there are days when I order multiple things on Amazon because I wake up in the morning and I think, oh, I forgot to order such and such, and then I order such and such, and then my wife texts me later and says, oh, can you order this book? And I do that, and at night I get home and I order something else. And then that day I will have gotten an order confirmation email, a shipping email, I might have gotten a delivery email. I could get 9 emails a day from Amazon, and I'm not cutting them off because they're emailing me so much, like, oh, stop emailing me all this. Email is a great channel for that stuff. Email works as a channel for lots of things, but we end up protecting it by saying, oh, you can only do one thing a day. And if you're thinking about personalization, about what communication should people receive or not receive, you should be able to use the channel in the way that makes sense without limiting yourself by saying, oh, this channel only does such and such. I'm protective of it. And I always give this Cocoa Puffs example. If you were the brand manager for Cocoa Puffs cereal in the 1950s, sorry, let me back up. Who is the word? Remember the first word, there's one word? Yeah, 2. So here's what who means. Back in the 1950s, and you were the brand manager for Cocoa Puffs, which must have been a great job, you thought a lot about, well, who am I selling Cocoa Puffs to? And you probably thought about 2 different audiences, and you'd say, moms I'm going to sell to because moms buy Cocoa Puffs. And then you thought, where can I message moms? I can message moms on soap operas because all moms do is stay home all day and clean and watch soap operas. It's in the 1950s, of course. And so I'll advertise there, and what's the message? And you thought, moms need to know that Cocoa Puffs are good for you, so I'm going to have a doctor on there talking about how they're fortified with vitamins and that makes your kids strong. So you started with who, moms, and then you thought, what am I messaging, your content, and where? That was the TV channel, right? So you said TV, great, that's what you did. then you step back and said, all right, well, who else wants Cocoa Puffs? And you'd say, 7-year-old boys, they're insane. They love Cocoa Puffs. Great. So you'd think about, OK, what's my message? We'll have an insane bird, a cartoon bird who goes crazy every time you eat it. And he's going to be, we're going to run these commercials on TV during Saturday morning cartoons, because that's where 7-year-old boys go. And it's going to be about how sugary they are. Great. But you started with who? You started with who buys Cocoa Puffs. It really starts with the product, and then who buys that product. And then the channel and the content naturally flow from that. But that's not where we start today, especially in digital, and especially in email where I grew up. It was very much about what email are we sending today? We're sending the sweaters email, V-neck sweaters email. All right, and everyone gets it. And they're like, OK, subject line, our V-neck sweaters are very comfortable. OK, great. And then you're like, upload, you copy the HTML, and you paste it. And you're like, I went to college and grad school to copy and paste HTML. Like, that's not why you hired smart people to do your marketing. It isn't about like, oh, today I got to send this message to everyone. That's because you're starting with what? You're starting with what the message is. And I'm guessing, like I used to force upon my team at Hilfiger, you'd get together every week or every other week. All right, what's our calendar? Monday is the V-neck sweater thing, and then Tuesday is 30% off, and then Wednesday is some other V-neck sweater reminder. Then Thursday is the V-neck sweater 30% off is ending soon. Friday is the extension. Then there's Friday night. There's the last chance. Then Saturday there's the real extension. You know that's not like really that. It seems kind of sad. It's a miss, and it doesn't allow you to personalize because you're set up to start with what? What are we doing? And when you start with what, you miss who would be interested in this. And when you look at those companies we looked at before, they started with who would be interested in this new special that Netflix is releasing. And when I get recommendations from Netflix, it is based on what I've bought before. And the reason why it's based on what I've watched before is because they know a lot about each of the specials I've watched and how embarrassing they are, right? And so they know that, and they're foundationally built around that. And by starting with who, you can do that too, even without attributing your products. If you step back and start to think about, how can I change my marketing program to start with the question of who rather than what? What would that mean? So let me get into that and give you 5 ideas about where you might start there. Okay? And there will be time for questions, I believe, at the end of this, unless I speak even slower. So what do I do next? Let's start with question 1. If the season's emails were campaign rather than a bunch of what are we sending today, what would that mean? Meaning, if you worked with your merchants and said to yourselves, all right, merchants, tell me what this season is about. Like, in apparel especially, because that's my background, obviously you're in lots of different businesses here. So you get deliveries every month, and each month tells a story, theoretically. And so if you said to your merchants, hey, instead of me just sending a sweater email on the 3rd of the month and a bottoms email on the 17th, tell me about the product. What would a campaign look like? What content can we create? So that, yes, you have some product focus, and then maybe there's things that are about the background of the delivery, and then some people who are interested in this, which we know because they're clicking, how much deeper could you go? What other content would they want to get? And are there other channels where we could also push this same information? But if you thought more holistically, rather than filling out a calendar, what's the story we could tell about our product? What would that look like? Question 2, and really I think this is, I'm always shocked. It's a pleasant surprise and an unpleasant surprise that I feel like in 2018 we're in an age where the technology is no longer the barrier. The barrier tends to be organizational to achieving the things we're trying to achieve. Technology has come a really, really long way. I'm really amazed, and I'm 24, about how quickly I'm not 24, about how quickly the past couple of years things have come along, that I really feel like in the past 4 or 5 years, for a host of reasons, technology has caught up to a lot of the things marketers are trying to achieve, but your organizations have not. And we're starting to see a little bit of that change, and we've seen Gap put out some articles about how they're reorganizing their business around trying to achieve some of this, but organizations tend to be the barriers. So can you convince your organization that the email channel can handle a lot of strategies, that it can handle both promotions and news and all the other things you would want to do via email, or handle sending some people 4 emails a day because that makes sense for those folks? Can you convince your organization? And if you can't, well, is it time to move on? Or is there a way to start to move that around a little bit? And what I found, especially in apparel, is oftentimes the brand marketing team tends to lead what can be done. That the changes in marketing tend to start with that organization. Not everywhere, but oftentimes that is the case. And you may have to sell that internally to that group first, or you might need to find one person in that organization who came from digital and moved to brand and work through how do we change our mindset here? But it does occur one person at a time. Third, how do you have to change your organizational structure to make who happen? That's the gap thing. Do you need to bring in a chief digital officer? Does this need to start at the top? Does it need to start with the board? Is this a board level change? Do you need a board level, a board member to come in to start forcing these changes, which is happening in some companies, right? There are a lot of companies where transformation starts there. And I love the example of Coach, which I think has done, really led the way in saying, hey, you know what, the way we've run our business, especially around promotions, and in the way our brand is being viewed, that cannot continue. And the only way they could make the changes they needed, which were painful, was to start at the top with the CEO and the board. And you may find that that is the only way this is going to happen. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because if the board and the CEO are on board, that will make a lot of this stuff happen faster. And so depending where you are in your organization, trying to find what is the path upwards to get the conversation with the senior exec team or the CEO, that may be the best thing you can do over the next 6 months to change things. Fourth, what does your tech need to do? There's so many ways to approach changing your technology so that you can think about, how do I know about my products? How do I match up their characteristics with people and my customers? And how do I decide where and what to message to them? There are a lot of ways to skin this cat, and I'm continually amazed when we go in and speak with our clients and prospects, especially at bigger companies, how they're trying to think about this question. Because I think it used to be, well, I'll buy Demandware and I'll buy an ESP, and maybe you buy us or one of our competitors, and maybe like a Certona, and you cobble it together, and great, everyone's good. And we're starting to see companies think about, well, what if I broke that all apart? What if the world didn't revolve around my ESP? What if my ESP weren't a fake CRM system where everything I know about my customers lived in there? What if that just sent messages and I built a CDP to collect data and spit it out to different channels? And what do I need in the future so that I'm not so reliant on this ESP, which was really just meant to send newsletters? If I'm not so reliant on that, what does my technology need to look like? Is a really challenging question, and there isn't an answer yet, but we're seeing people ask this question. Help me break down the technology I have into the component parts and put it back together. And finally, what do you need to know about your products to figure out which people would be interested in them? It took Netflix a long time to figure that out, right? That's a hard question to think about, well, I thought this movie was just a comedy, or just a comedy from the 80s, or just a classic. And to sit in a room and think about, okay, tell me everything we know about this suit. What are all the attributes? Because it starts with the merchants, and I think it's one way to get your marketing team and your merchants who've traditionally sort of been a little bit at odds, especially online, to think about, well, how can I help you sell more product? Really, the way you're going to do that is by knowing more about the product. Marketing's done a pretty good job about knowing about customers, and we've really let the product piece fall off. I think we'll never be successful in matching up products and the people who are going to buy them, and then determining, okay, what channel are we talking to them, and with what message, without knowing about the products. That's the end. There's a lunch coming up. We'll have a minute or two for Q&A. I'm leading a roundtable, apparently, at lunch, a little bit about this, and more about email specifically. That's going to ask the question of, if you didn't have to send any emails tomorrow, and you had a blank slate for the next year and $1 billion, what might your email, just as a thought exercise, what might your email look like? So we're going to talk about that, but I can take questions for 2 minutes. Thanks.
Do we have any questions from the room? Come on. Okay,
you can ask me questions in the lunch. Oh, there's actually on the next slide.
I have one question.
Oh, you do? Oh, sorry.
Let's talk a little bit about the families of data that you're finding useful as you're working with clients that are being used for personalization, both from a product and a customer perspective.
Yeah, I think we're seeing I think the interesting piece of it is around the data science piece. I think that we've collected a lot of data around what people are doing. We do know a lot about what people are doing, right? You've got omniture, you've got a lot of ways, and you know who clicked on what. Like, you've got a lot of information there. We don't know a ton about products, but we know some things. But the idea of data science, which is saying, help me use math to fill in the gaps of my knowledge, help me find out, because it's easy enough to create an audience, for example, of people who looked at shoes and to send them an email about shoes. But data science helps you increase your reach and to say, like, okay, you know what? I bet I can get a 40% open rate if I just take shoe buyers and send them an email about shoes. But if I could triple that audience by using data science, help me find everyone whom I think would be interested in shoes using math, you can get greater reach with similar response. And I think what we're seeing there, and we do that, but like there's lots of other companies that do that. There's companies that have brought data scientists in-house. I think that's a really interesting area to think about, all right, using what we know, how do we layer on math to make better decisions and improve our targeting?
Okay, great. We have time for one more quick question. Okay.
All right, lunch is served. You can check the app for table topics. There's lunch and learns. Like I said, I'll be leading the one around email, so you can ask questions there because I know it's embarrassing in a room. No more embarrassing than me standing here for half an hour, of course. And there'll be in Hub 1 and Hub 2, like the cat in the hat. So head off to lunch. The hubs are on the other side. Thanks so much.
Sure.